I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being.
Catherine said nothing. She made no announcement, she simply moved. And by the time Camilla understood what had happened, it was already too late to stop it. The quiet rise. Nobody saw coming. There is a particular kind of power that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a title change, a press conference, or a carefully worded palace statement. It does not generate headlines on the day it begins, nor does it ask for recognition, validation, or applause. It simply builds, quietly, persistently, with a patience that most people in positions of privilege find almost impossible to sustain. That is exactly how Catherine, Princess of Wales, built what she has inside the British royal family. And by the time anyone fully understood what she had constructed, it was already immovable. To understand the full weight of what Catherine did and why it stunned everyone, including Camilla, you have to go back. Not to the move itself, but to the years that made the move possible. Catherine entered the royal family in April 2011 as a 29-year-old woman, someone who the press had spent nearly a decade describing, in terms that were not always flattering. She had waited and stayed. She had endured years of public scrutiny, tabloid cruelty, and the particular exhaustion of being perpetually almost royal without yet being royal at all. Many people interpreted that waiting as passivity. They were wrong. What Catherine was doing during those years of waiting was watching, absorbing, learning the institution from the outside with a clarity that people born into it rarely develop, because familiarity breeds blindness. She watched how the palace managed crises, and she watched which courtiers held real influence and which ones simply held impressive titles. She watched how the press operated, what it rewarded, punished, and where the boundaries of its loyalty actually sat. She arrived on her wedding day in April 2011, not as someone stepping nervously into an unfamiliar world, but as someone who had already studied that world for nearly a decade and understood it more completely than most of its lifelong inhabitants. But even then, in those early years of her royal life, the full scope of what Catherine was building was not visible. What the public saw was duty, charitable work, a growing family, a dignified, measured, carefully managed public presence. That generated warmth without controversy and admiration, without the kind of fierce personal loyalty that changes institutions. What was happening beneath that surface was something else entirely. Catherine was building relationships, not the performative relationships of someone working a room. Deep, genuine, sustained relationships with the people who actually run the machinery of the British monarchy. The senior courtiers, private secretaries, and the communications staff. She built relationships with the household staff who have served through multiple generations and whose institutional memory stretches back further than any single royal's reign. These are the people who hold the real knowledge of how the palace works, who understand where the pressure points are, and know which decisions matter and which ones are purely ceremonial, who can make things happen quietly and make things disappear just as quietly. Catherine cultivated every single one of them, not through charm alone, but through consistency and showing up prepared, through remembering details about their lives and their families, and through treating them as partners in a shared project, rather than as staff executing instructions. Insiders who have worked across multiple royal households describe Catherine's relationship with palace staff in terms that are almost universal in their consistency. She makes people feel that what they do matters. That is not a small thing. In an institution where hierarchy is absolute, and the distance between the royals and the people who serve them has historically been enormous, that quality is remarkable, and it generates a specific kind of loyalty. Not the professional loyalty of people doing their jobs. The personal loyalty of people who would go further than their jobs require because they genuinely believe in the person they are serving. That loyalty became the foundation of everything that followed. But Catherine was not only building relationships inside the palace, she was building something equally important outside it.
For all the wonderful messages of support and for your understanding.
Public trust. Not the surface-level popularity that comes from good photographs and a pleasant manner. Deep, resilient, tested public trust of the kind that survives serious challenge. The cancer diagnosis in early 2024 was the moment that trust was fully revealed, When Catherine stepped forward and announced her diagnosis with a directness and a humanity that the palace had never previously managed in a health crisis, the public response was extraordinary. Not just sympathy, something stronger, a protective instinct. A sense of personal investment in her recovery that crossed age groups, political opinions, and even the traditional Republican versus monarchist divide. People who had no strong feelings about the royal family found themselves genuinely concerned about Catherine. That is not manufactured. You cannot manufacture that. It is the product of years of authentic engagement, of someone who had given enough of herself genuinely and consistently that the public felt they actually knew her. And here is what made that moment so significant in the context of what was about to happen. Catherine emerged from her cancer treatment not diminished, not fragile, not a figure requiring protection and careful management. She emerged with more public capital than she had entered it with. More trusted and beloved, more personally significant to the British public than any other member of the royal family, including the king himself. And Camilla, watching that emergence from her position as queen consort, understood something in that moment that she had perhaps not fully reckoned with before. Catherine was no longer simply the future. She was the present. She was the person the public turned to, the person the institution needed most visibly, the person whose approval, presence, and endorsement had become the most valuable commodity inside the British monarchy. And she had achieved all of that without ever appearing to compete, without ever appearing to maneuver. She did it without ever once making Camilla feel directly threatened until the moment the move landed. What was the move? The one move that stunned everyone. There are moments in royal history that only make sense in retrospect. You watch them happen in real time, and they appear ordinary, ceremonial, perhaps even routine. Another public appearance, another carefully managed palace moment in a long succession of carefully managed palace moments. And then someone who understands the institution looks at what just happened and goes very still, because they understand what everyone else missed. That is exactly what happened with Catherine's move. To fully understand it, you need to understand the specific landscape of power inside the palace in the months following Catherine's return from cancer treatment in late 2024.
For the millions more who love and care for them.
The atmosphere at that point was delicate. Charles was still managing his own cancer treatment, while maintaining his public duties with the kind of disciplined stoicism that has defined his entire reign. The Andrew scandal had generated ongoing damage that the institution was still quietly absorbing. Public support for the monarchy was measurable but fragile among younger demographics. And Camilla, as queen consort, was exploring a position that had never been entirely comfortable. She had been accepted, formally, officially, with the full weight of coronation ceremony and constitutional designation behind her. But acceptance and genuine public warmth are not the same thing. And the warmth that Camilla had hoped would develop naturally over time had proved stubbornly difficult to generate at the level the role required. She was respected by some, tolerated by many, genuinely beloved by very few. That was the landscape when Catherine returned, and what Catherine did next was so simple, clean, and perfectly calibrated to the specific vulnerabilities of that landscape that the people who witnessed it inside the palace described their reaction with one word: breathtaking. Here is what she did. In the months following her return to public duties, Catherine began appearing at engagements that had historically fallen within Camilla's designated areas of patronage and public interest, not aggressively, not with any announcement or formal designation change, simply by being present and by showing up, by directing her considerable public profile and her enormous reservoir of public goodwill toward causes and institutions that Camilla had previously occupied largely alone: literature, the arts, support for women facing health challenges, initiatives connected to early childhood development that intersected with broader social welfare conversations that Camilla had championed. Catherine did not replace Camilla in any of these spaces officially. She simply became more visible within them, and visibility in the economy of royal influence is everything. When two people occupy the same space and one of them generates 10 times the public engagement, the media coverage, and the institutional enthusiasm of the other, the balance of significance shifts automatically. No announcement required, No formal change of designation was needed. The cameras make the decision, the public makes the decision. And the decision, once made, is extremely difficult to reverse. But the visibility alone, while significant, was not the move that stunned everyone. The move came in a specific moment in February 2025. Catherine attended an engagement at a London institution that had been closely associated with Camilla's patronage for several years. A literary foundation with deep connections to the kind of traditional British cultural establishment that Camilla had worked hard to cultivate as her primary area of public identity. Catherine arrived without fanfare. She engaged with warmth and genuine knowledge. She spoke about the foundation's work with the kind of specific, prepared, clearly researched understanding that told everyone in the room she had not simply shown up. She had done the work at the end of the engagement. In a moment that was captured by the small press pool present and distributed globally within hours, Catherine made an announcement. The Prince and Princess of Wales would be extending their patronage to the foundation, effective immediately, with a specific funding commitment attached and a multi-year partnership framework already agreed. The announcement was made without any prior coordination with Camilla's office, without any consultation with the Queen Consort's team, and without any warning to the institution that had considered itself firmly within Camilla's sphere of influence. It simply happened, and by the time Camilla's office understood what had occurred, the photographs were already published. The announcement was already being celebrated in the press, and the foundation's leadership was already publicly expressing their gratitude and excitement about the new partnership. There was nothing to counter, nothing to qualify, nothing to walk back without creating a public confrontation that would have been far more damaging to Camilla than the original move itself. Inside the palace, the reaction among senior staff was split directly along lines that themselves told a story. Those aligned with Camilla's operation were furious. Sources describe urgent phone calls, heated internal communications, and a formal complaint raised through palace channels about the lack of coordination. Those aligned with William and Catherine's household were calm, measured, and, according to multiple insiders, quietly satisfied. Because here is what Camilla's team had missed entirely. The move had not been spontaneous. It had been planned, carefully, patiently, and over a considerable period of time. The partnership framework Catherine announced the day had been in development for months. The funding commitment had been agreed in principle long before Catherine walked through the foundation's doors. The only thing that had not been shared was the timing. And the timing was the entire point. By announcing at a Camilla-associated institution rather than a neutral venue, Catherine sent a message that required no translation inside the palace. The message was about territory, not aggressive territorial claim, something more sophisticated than that. A quiet, elegant, completely deniable demonstration that the boundaries of Catherine's influence were expanding, that the spaces Camilla had considered her own were no longer exclusively hers, that the future of the institution had a different center of gravity now. Royal commentators who were briefed on the details in the days that followed described the move with a consistency that was itself revealing. Masterclass was the word that appeared most frequently, not in Camilla's favor, but here is the question that nobody inside the palace had fully answered yet. How would Camilla respond? Because the move had been made, the territory had shifted, and the message had been sent and received. But Camilla was not without resources. She was not without allies. She was not without the specific advantages that come with being the reigning monarch's wife. She had options. She chose to use them. And every single choice she made in the weeks that followed made her position measurably worse. Camilla's response, SN wipes, it made things worse. There is a rule in institutional politics that the most experienced operators understand instinctively. When someone makes a move against you that is clean, quiet, and publicly deniable, the worst thing you can do is respond loudly. Because a loud response confirms the move landed. It tells everyone watching that you felt it, that it hurt, that the balance of power has shifted enough to make you uncomfortable. And discomfort in the world of royal politics is the one thing you can never afford to show. Camilla showed it, not in a single dramatic moment, not in a public statement, a press conference, or a direct confrontation with Catherine that palace cameras could capture. She showed it in a series of decisions made in the weeks following Catherine's move. Decisions that each seemed defensible in isolation, decisions that together constructed a picture so clear that even the most loyal members of Camilla's inner circle found it difficult to look at directly. The first decision was the briefing. Within days of Catherine's announcement at the Literary Foundation, stories began appearing in royal sympathetic corners of the British press. Stories that were not explicitly critical of Catherine, but that carried a specific undertone, a suggestion that the Princess of Wales had overstepped, that the move had been made without appropriate consultation, and that there were those inside the palace who felt the coordination between the two royal households needed to be more carefully managed going forward. The stories were not attributed, they never are. But the direction from which they traveled was obvious to anyone familiar with how palace briefings work. Camilla's team was talking, and here is why that was a catastrophic mistake. Catherine's operation said nothing, not a single counter-briefing, or a whispered correction to a trusted journalist. Not a carefully planted suggestion that the Princess of Wales's office was puzzled by the Queen Consort's reaction. Complete silence. And in the court of public opinion, the contrast between the two approaches told its own story. On one side, a Queen Consort whose office was briefing against a cancer survivor's return to public life. On the other side, a Princess of Wales who appeared entirely unbothered by the controversy her move had generated. Which of those two pictures do you think the public found more sympathetic? The briefing strategy did not just fail. It actively transferred sympathy from Camilla to Catherine in a way that no amount of subsequent management could fully correct. But Camilla did not stop there. The second decision was the scheduling war. In the weeks following Catherine's foundation announcement, Camilla's team began aggressively scheduling public engagements in areas that directly overlapped with Catherine's established patronages: healthcare initiatives, early childhood programs, community outreach events that had previously been exclusively associated with the Princess of Wales. The intention was transparent to everyone inside the palace. Camilla was attempting to demonstrate that she too could occupy those spaces, that Catherine had not established exclusive territory, that the Queen Consort's reach was broad enough to match, and if necessary, exceed anything the Princess of Wales could generate. The execution was a disaster, not because the engagements were handled badly. Camilla performed them with the professionalism that decades of royal life had embedded in her. Worst means, she showed up, and she engaged. She fulfilled every requirement of the appearances, but the numbers told a story that no amount of professional execution could override. Catherine's engagements generated 3 times the media coverage, 4 times the social media engagement, and a quality of public enthusiasm that Camilla's events, through no fault of the specific charities involved, simply could not match. Side by side, comparisons were inevitable. The press made them without hesitation, and those comparisons did not favor the Queen Consort. What the scheduling war achieved was not a demonstration of Camilla's reach. It was a demonstration of the gap, a gap that might have remained comfortably unexamined if Camilla's team had not insisted on creating the conditions for direct comparison. Palace insiders who watched this unfold described the atmosphere in Camilla's household during this period as increasingly tense. Staff who had served her loyally for years found themselves experiencing a leadership environment that was becoming reactive rather than strategic. Decisions were being made quickly, emotionally, without the careful consideration of second and third order consequences that effective institutional politics requires. One insider described it with a precision that is worth sitting with. They stopped playing chess and started playing drafts. And Catherine was still playing chess. The third decision was the most damaging of all, and it did not come from Camilla directly. It came from Tom.
Jesus. That tastes like British Airways coffee. That is not a compliment. That's really...
Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's son, had maintained a relatively measured public profile through most of the preceding years. He had built a legitimate career as a food writer and broadcaster. He had been careful mostly to keep his public commentary away from the more combustible aspects of his mother's position. In March 2025, that caution evaporated. In an interview that his own representatives later described as having been taken out of context, Tom made comments about the Princess of Wales. That stopped well short of direct criticism, but carried a tone that was immediately and almost universally interpreted as dismissive. He spoke about the difference between those who are born into a role and those who marry into one, about the weight of blood connection versus the weight of institutional position, about what he called the natural authority that comes from a lifetime inside the family rather than a lifetime spent studying it from outside. He did not name Catherine. He did not need to. The interview landed like a stone in still water. The ripples moved outward immediately. Catherine's office said nothing. William's office said nothing. The palace communications team said nothing, and then the public said everything. The reaction was swift, unified, and devastating for Camilla's position. Not because Tom's comments were particularly extreme in their content, but because the timing made them unforgivable in the court of public sympathy. Here was the son of the Queen Consort appearing to diminish a woman who had spent the previous year fighting cancer. A woman who had returned to public life with extraordinary grace and dignity. A woman whose approval ratings at that point were the highest of any member of the royal family, including the king. The optics were catastrophic, and here is what made it worse. Camilla did not immediately distance herself from her son's comments. Her office issued a brief statement, noting that Tom's views were his own and did not represent the Queen Consort's position. But the statement came 48 hours after the interviews published. 48 hours during which the story had been covered globally, the public reaction had fully formed, and the damage had already embedded itself in the narrative. 48 hours is a lifetime in a modern media cycle. By the time the statement arrived, it was not damage control. It was an acknowledgement that damage had occurred. Inside the palace, the reaction to Tom's interview and to Camilla's delayed response was described by multiple sources using the same language. Disbelief, not at Tom. He had made an error of judgment. People make errors of judgment. The disbelief was directed at the response, at the 48-hour silence, at the apparent absence of a rapid reaction protocol that any competent communications operation maintains precisely for moments like this. It suggested something about the state of Camilla's operation that her allies found deeply troubling. It was not functioning at the level the moment required. In William and Catherine's household, watching the 48-hour silence with the calm attention of people who had prepared carefully for exactly this kind of moment, did what they always do when the advantage is theirs. They waited. They let the story run. They let the reaction build. They let the 48 hours expire and the damage fully land before Catherine was seen publicly for the first time since Tom's interview. She appeared at a children's hospice in the west of England. No statement about Tom, no acknowledgement of the controversy. Simply Catherine doing what Catherine does, being present and warm, being exactly the person the public had decided they needed her to be. The photographs from that appearance ran on the front pages of every major British newspaper the following morning. Tom's interview had vanished from the news cycle entirely. Catherine had not said a single word about any of it. She had not needed to, and that is the moment that many palace insiders identify as the true turning point. Not Catherine's original move at the foundation, not the briefing war or the scheduling conflict or Tom's interview. The moment Catherine stood in that hospice and said nothing, and the entire controversy dissolved around her. That was when the people inside the palace who had been watching carefully understood something with complete clarity. This was not a temporary shift in the balance of power. It was permanent. Why this cannot be undone. There is a moment in every power shift when the people involved stop asking whether it is happening and start asking what it means. That moment arrived inside Buckingham Palace in the spring of 2025. And the answer to what it means is the chapter that nobody inside the institution is saying out loud, not in official statements or in carefully worded palace communications, not in the measured diplomatic language that the monarchy deploys whenever the truth is too uncomfortable for public consumption. But the people who work inside those walls every day understand it completely. What Catherine built cannot be dismantled. What shifted cannot be shifted back. And what Camilla lost in those weeks of reactive, emotionally driven decision-making is not recoverable through any strategy, alliance, or any institutional maneuver currently available to her. This is permanent. And to understand why it is permanent, you need to understand the 4 pillars that make Catherine's position unassailable. Because it is not one thing that makes this irreversible. It is the combination of 4 things working together simultaneously. 4 things that Camilla cannot match, replicate, and undermine without making her own position measurably worse in the attempt. The first pillar is public trust, not popularity. Trust. There is a difference, and it matters enormously in the context of what comes next for this institution. Popularity is volatile. It rises and falls with news cycles, public appearances, and the daily management of narrative. Celebrities are popular. Politicians are popular. Public figures cultivate popularity through carefully managed exposure and strategic generosity with their public image. Trust is different. It is built over years through consistency, through showing up the same way in good times and difficult times, through being recognizably yourself under pressure, and giving people enough of the real thing that they develop a sense of genuine knowledge about who you are. Catherine built that trust across more than a decade of public life. She built it through the consistency of her charitable work, through the specificity of her engagement with causes she clearly understood and genuinely cared about. She built it through the way she conducted herself during her own family's most difficult periods. And then she built it more completely than any of that in the 12 months of her cancer treatment, because that period gave the public something that years of perfectly managed appearances never could. Vulnerability. Real, unscripted, undeniable vulnerability. The kind that you cannot manufacture and cannot fake, because audiences instinctively recognize the difference between someone performing openness and someone actually being open. Catherine was actually open. She told the world about her diagnosis in a video message filmed in her own home, in her own clothes, with her children nearby and her fear visible in her eyes even as her voice remained steady. The public did not just sympathize, they decided she was one of them. That decision, once made by a population at that scale and with that depth of feeling, is not reversed by a scheduling conflict, a palace briefing war, or a food writer's ill-timed interview. It is structural, and Camilla, who has spent years trying to generate that quality of public warmth through carefully managed appearances and strategic charitable positioning, understands that she cannot compete with it. You cannot compete with something that cannot be manufactured. The second pillar is institutional alignment. This is the one that is least visible publicly and most consequential privately. Inside the palace, the people who actually run the machinery of the British monarchy have made their assessment. The senior courtiers, the private secretaries, the communications directors, the household staff whose institutional loyalty transcends any individual royal's tenure. They have watched what happened across the past 18 months. They have watched Catherine move, watched Camilla respond, watched the consequences of both play out in real time, and they have drawn conclusions that now inform every operational decision made inside that building. Catherine is the future, not as an abstract acknowledgement of succession timelines, as an operational reality that shapes how resources are allocated, communications are managed, engagements are prioritized, and how the institution presents itself to the public it serves. When the people who run the palace machinery align behind someone, that alignment generates its own momentum. Decisions begin flowing in one direction. Resources begin concentrating in one place. The subtle but enormously powerful infrastructure of institutional support begins building itself around one figure. That figure is Catherine. And Camilla's attempts to counter that alignment, the briefings, the scheduling, Tom's interview, have not weakened it. They have strengthened it, because every reactive move Camilla's team made confirmed the courtier's assessment, confirmed that the Queen Consort's operation was not functioning at the level the institution required, confirmed that the future of the monarchy's public-facing authority needed to be anchored somewhere else, somewhere it already was. The third pillar is Charles. This is the pillar that Camilla's supporters find most difficult to accept, and the one that palace insiders describe with the most careful language. Because the relationship between a king and his wife is not something that institutional observers characterize directly or lightly, but the evidence speaks clearly enough without characterization. King Charles has not intervened. In the weeks following Catherine's move at the foundation, during the briefing war, during the scheduling conflict, during Tom's interview, and the 48-hour silence that followed it, not once did any signal emerge from the king's office that suggested displeasure with Catherine's actions or support for Camilla's response. Not once. In royal politics, a king's silence is never neutral. It is always a message, and the message that Charles's silence sent throughout that period was received with perfect clarity by everyone inside the palace. He was not going to protect Camilla's territory. He was not going to intervene in the shifting of influence away from his wife and toward his daughter-in-law. He was, if anything, aligned with the shift, and that alignment makes sense when you understand what Charles has spent his entire reign trying to build: a modernized, streamlined, publicly credible monarchy. An institution that earns its place through demonstrated relevance rather than inherited authority. A royal family whose public-facing figures generate genuine affection rather than polite tolerance. Catherine delivers that, every day, consistently, without drama, without the kind of institutional friction that consumes energy and generates headlines for the wrong reasons. Camilla, through no malice and no fundamental failure of character, has not delivered it at the same level. And Charles, who has waited his entire life to build the monarchy he believes in, is not going to compromise that project, not for the sake of a territorial dispute that his wife's own team created the conditions for. The fourth pillar is time, and this is the one that makes everything else permanent. William will be king. That is not a prediction. It is a constitutional certainty. The only questions are of timing. And those timing questions, given Charles's age and ongoing health challenges, may resolve sooner than official palace communications have acknowledged. When William becomes king, Catherine becomes queen consort. And when that happens, every resource, property, platform, and every institutional privilege that currently sits with Camilla will transfer. Not gradually, instantly. The way power always transfers inside the British monarchy, in a single afternoon, with the full force of constitutional law behind it, without ceremony and without the possibility of appeal. Camilla will retain Clarence House and Highgrove. She will retain financial support and royal staff. She will retain the title of Queen Dowager and the formal respect that the institution extends to its previous consorts. But Sandringham will pass to William. Balmoral will pass to William. The operational center of the monarchy will shift completely. The household staff whose loyalty she has cultivated will transfer their professional allegiance to the new king and his queen. The courtiers who currently move carefully between the two royal households will no longer need to explore. There will be one center of power, and it will be Catherine's. Camilla knows this. Her team knows this. The allies she has cultivated across years of careful relationship, building inside and outside the palace, know this. And that knowledge is the context inside which every decision being made in her household right now is operating. She is not fighting to win. She is fighting to define the terms of how she loses, to preserve enough dignity, influence, and enough of the public identity she has built across 2 decades of royal life, to ensure that what comes after is not erasure, but graceful transition. Whether she succeeds in that more limited objective depends entirely on whether her team can find the strategic discipline that the preceding months suggested was absent, whether they can stop responding to Catherine's moves and start managing the narrative of Camilla's own legacy, or if they can accept that the ground has shifted and work with the new landscape rather than against it. Palace insiders are divided on whether that shift is possible. Some believe Camilla is capable of the recalibration, that the instinct for survival that has carried her through 50 years of public scrutiny, scandal, and reinvention will assert itself now when it is needed most. Others are less certain. They point to the briefings, scheduling war, and the 48-hour silence, the pattern of reactive decision-making that characterized the response to Catherine's move. And they ask a question that nobody in Camilla's circle has yet answered satisfactorily. If the team could not find the discipline then, what has changed now? The answer to that question will determine not just the remainder of Camilla's time as queen consort. It will determine how history remembers her, a woman who passed through one of the most complicated journeys in modern royal history with eventual grace and wisdom, or a woman who, at the moment that required her greatest steadiness, blinked. Catherine is not watching to see which it will be. She does not need to watch. She has already moved. Catherine made one move. She needed only one. Built on years of trust, institutional alignment, and patience that most people mistook for passivity, it changed the balance of power inside the palace permanently. Camilla saw it coming and still could not stop it. That is the measure of how completely it was done.